The Mediterranean world of 1200 BCE was a tapestry of glittering empires, woven together by trade and diplomacy. Then, without warning, the fabric tore. A shadow fell across the coasts, moving with terrifying speed. Armies and fleets, unlike any ever seen, erupted from the horizon. They left smoldering cities and toppled kingdoms in their wake, and then they simply disappeared from the record. They left behind only a name etched in stone by their terrified victims, the Sea Peoples. By the end of this journey, you will piece together the fragments of this ancient cataclysm to understand the force that nearly erased civilization itself. Who were these mysterious raiders, and what desperate chain of events set them in motion? Their story begins not with an answer, but with a world on the brink of collapse. What does it feel like when history itself forgets? That world on the brink was a masterpiece of human achievement. For centuries, a delicate equilibrium had held across the eastern Mediterranean. This was not a collection of isolated kingdoms, but a single, vibrant system. Pharaohs in Egypt exchanged lavish letters and gifts with Hittite emperors in Anatolia. Mycenaean Greek merchants sailed with holds full of olive oil and fine pottery, trading for copper from Cyprus and tin from distant lands. This intricate web of diplomacy and commerce, recorded on clay tablets in a shared diplomatic language, created a golden age of stability and wealth. Grand palaces stored immense surpluses, and a class of scribes and administrators kept everything running smoothly. It was a globalized world, remarkably similar in its connections to our own. But this system had grown brittle, its foundations quietly cracking under immense pressure. A changing climate began to parch the land. Tree rings and ancient pollen records tell a story of prolonged drought and failing harvests. Famine crept into the cities. At the same time, the very earth seemed to revolt. Archaeological layers from Greece to Anatolia show evidence of massive, successive earthquakes toppling fortress walls that had stood for generations. Inside the kingdoms, the strain sparked unrest. The peasant farmers and laborers, the people who grew the grain and moved the goods, faced starvation while the palace storehouses remained full. Tensions simmered, then boiled over into local rebellions, fracturing the internal order of these great states. The empires were now straining under multiple crises, each one weakening their ability to respond to the next. They were like mighty ships, their hulls already taking on water from a slow leak, when a storm of unimaginable force appeared on the horizon. The arrival of the Sea Peoples was that storm. They did not cause the initial cracks in the system, but they delivered the final, shattering blow. Their attacks severed the vital maritime trade routes, the lifelines of the Bronze Age world. One by one, the great palaces were burned and abandoned. The Hittite Empire vanished entirely. The Mycenaean citadels fell into silence and ruin. In Egypt alone, a kingdom pushed to its absolute limit, survived but at a terrible cost. Its economy shattered and its power permanently diminished. When the smoke cleared, an eerie silence descended. The art of writing was largely forgotten for centuries outside of Egypt. The vast trade networks evaporated, leaving communities isolated. The complex political order dissolved into smaller, poorer settlements. This was not a transition, but a rupture. Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse, a dark age that lasted for nearly 400 years, a collective amnesia where the lights of civilization flickered and almost went out. The Sea Peoples did not just defeat armies, they erased a world, and in doing so, they performed a kind of historical vanishing act, disappearing into the very chaos they helped create. The clearest window into this chaos is carved in stone on the walls of an Egyptian temple. To understand the Sea Peoples, we must listen to the voice of the only civilization that survived their onslaught and chose to record it for eternity. On the mortuary temple of Pharaoh Ramesses III at Medinet Habu, a sprawling story in sandstone tells of a desperate fight for survival. The reliefs are not subtle propaganda, they are a raw and visceral account of panic. We see a chaotic naval battle, the water churning with overturned ships. The vessels of the invaders are unlike Egyptian warships, with high, vertical prunes and sternposts shaped like bird heads designed for the open sea. Their warriors are depicted in distinct plumed headdresses, some with horned helmets carrying round shields and long, straight swords. This is not a single, uniform army, but a coalition of different peoples united in their destructive purpose. The hieroglyphic text that accompanies these scenes is even more revealing. It states the foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were on the move, scattered in war. No land could stand before their arms. The phrasing is crucial. A conspiracy in their islands suggests a coordinated movement originating from a maritime base, possibly the Aegean or the coastal reaches of Anatolia. All at once the lands were on the move points to a mass migration, not just a raiding party. They came with their families, their ox carts, and all their possessions, a people entirely uprooted. The inscription lists the names of these groups, names that echo with mystery: the Peleset, the Jekka, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, and the Weshesh. These are the tribes of the sea peoples. Ramesses describes a two-pronged assault, a terrifying pincer movement. Their main force moved south along the coast of the Levant by land and by sea, destroying the Hittite Empire and the great trading cities like Ugarit along the way. A separate northern contingent attempted a direct invasion of the Nile Delta by ship. The pharaoh claims a monumental victory, depicting himself standing triumphantly on the shore as his archers rain arrows down on the enemy fleet and his infantry captures the invaders' families. For Egypt, it was a deliverance but a Pyrrhic one. The kingdom was bled dry by the effort, its treasury exhausted, and its control over its foreign territories forever broken. The Egyptian records give the sea peoples a face and a name, but in doing so, they deepen the central mystery. Who were these named tribes, and from what shattered homeland did they truly come? These names from the Egyptian inscriptions are our only roster for this ancient mystery. Each one is a clue, a fragment of identity pointing to a different corner of the collapsing world. The most famous among them are the Peleset. The Egyptian records show them not just as raiders, but as a people on the move with ox carts and families. After their defeat by Ramesses, they did not vanish. Instead, they settled permanently along the southern coast of Canaan. Archaeology confirms this. In the decades after 1200 BCE, the cities of Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Ekron show a sudden, dramatic shift. New styles of pottery appear, distinct from local Canaanite ware, with sophisticated designs that echo Mycenaean Greek techniques. Their architecture changes, featuring hearths in a style common in the Aegean. The Bible would later know these settlers as the Philistines, giving the entire region its name, Palestine. So the Peleset were likely a displaced Aegean people who found a new home, their story evolving from invader to settled neighbor. Then we have the Jekka. They are mentioned as settling further north, around the port city of Dor in modern-day Israel. The Shekelesh present another compelling link. Their name sounds remarkably similar to Sickles, the people who inhabited the island of Sicily in later centuries. Could a group from the central Mediterranean have been swept into this eastward migration? The Denyen are perhaps the most tantalizing. Many scholars hear a direct echo in the name Danaoi, one of the ancient names Homer uses for the Greeks in the Iliad. This suggests a possible Mycenaean Greek origin, survivors of their own civilizations collapse now taking to the sea. Two other groups stand out for their earlier appearances. The Sherden are recorded not just as enemies, but decades earlier as elite mercenaries in the Egyptian army, famed for their distinctive horned helmets and long swords. Their name seems to whisper of Sardinia, though whether they came from that island or gave it their name remains an open question. Finally, the Weshesh remain the most obscure of all, a name without a clear linguistic footprint, a ghost within the catalogue. This list is not a simple roll call of a single nation. It is a catalogue of chaos. It points to origins scattered across the map, from the islands and coasts of Greece and Anatolia to the far western reaches of Sardinia and Sicily. This is the core of the puzzle. They were not a unified ethnic group, but a coalition of the desperate. They were the uprooted, the survivors of all those separate collapses we discussed earlier, the earthquake-shattered cities of Anatolia, the famine-racked villages of Greece, the political unrest across the region. They became a single, swirling storm of humanity, pushed from their homes by disaster and pulled toward the last remaining beacon of wealth and stability, Egypt. Their diversity is the key to understanding the true scale of the late Bronze Age collapse. It was not one event, but many, converging into a single, catastrophic wave. Their military success was not a matter of simple numbers or blind fury. It was a product of terrifyingly effective design, a toolkit for disruption perfectly suited to shatter the old order. The Egyptian carvings at Medinet Habu provide a detailed catalogue of their arsenal, and every piece tells a story of a different kind of warfare. Look closely at the warriors. They are not dressed in the rigid, structured armor of the great empires. Instead, their most striking feature is their headgear, those iconic plumed or horned helmets. These were not just for intimidation. They were likely made of stiffened leather or bronze, offering protection without the weight of a full bronze helmet, granting greater mobility in the chaotic press of a ship deck or a beachhead raid. They carry round shields, often depicted as a single, grip design, easier to maneuver in tight quarters than the large, body-covering shields of Egyptian or Hittite infantry. And then there are the swords. This is perhaps the most significant detail. The Sea Peoples wield long, straight slashing swords, a stark contrast to the shorter, thrusting swords or the sickle-like khopesh of the Egyptians. This was a weapon for open, sweeping attacks, designed to break the lines of tightly packed formations. It speaks of a style of combat that favored individual prowess and shock over disciplined phalanxes. Their naval technology completed this picture of a mobile, agile threat. The Egyptian reliefs show their ships as sleek, oar-powered vessels, built for the open sea with high prows and sterns. Crucially, they are not shown with sails. This was a deliberate choice. A sailing ship is dependent on the wind, a raiding vessel is not. These were landing craft designed for speed and sudden assault, able to row directly onto a beach, disgorge warriors, and push back off with minimal delay. This gave them a strategic flexibility that the traditional empires, with their deep draft sailing ships that required proper harbors, simply could not match. Their tactics flowed directly from this equipment. They perfected the combined land and sea assault. While their main force moved slowly down the coast with families and carts, a fleet of these fast ships would strike ahead, hitting coastal cities and severing supply and communication lines. A fortified city expecting a traditional siege from the landward side could find its undefended harbor suddenly swarming with raiders. They did not aim to conquer territory in the traditional sense, at least not at first. They aimed to cripple, to burn granaries, to disrupt trade, and to create panic against the slow, regimented armies of the Bronze Age empires who were trained for set-piece battles and defending fixed borders. The Sea Peoples were a whirlwind. They were the blueprint for a new, asymmetric form of warfare that would come to define ages of chaos, where the greatest strength was not in holding a line, but in moving faster than your enemy can possibly respond. But to truly grasp the scale of their impact, we must witness the silence they left behind. No kingdom illustrates this finality more starkly than the Hittite Empire. For centuries, it was Egypt's great rival, a superpower of the ancient world whose heart lay in the rugged highlands of Anatolia. Its capital, Hattusa, was a marvel of engineering and might, a sprawling fortress city of cyclopean stone walls, grand temples, and vast underground granaries designed to withstand any siege. Then, around 1200 BCE, it simply ceased to exist. The city was not merely conquered, it was subjected to a systematic and total destruction. Archaeological excavations reveal a layer of ash and burnt debris meters thick. Palaces and temples were torched, their walls blackened by intense fire. The great storage complexes, once bulging with grain to feed the empire, were emptied and set ablaze. Hattusa was not just defeated, it was erased from the map of living cities, abandoned for good and left to the wolves and the weather for over 3,000 years. This was not the work of a random band of raiders. This was a deliberate act of annihilation, the signature of a force intent on dismantling an entire world order. So, were the Sea Peoples the ones who put the torch to Hattusa's gates? The answer is frustratingly complex. The Hittite Empire was already in dire straits. Those same climatic droughts that strained Egypt were crippling in Anatolia, where agriculture was always a precarious gamble. Famine stalked the land. Internally, the empire may have been fracturing under the weight of succession disputes and unrest among its many subject peoples. The Hittites were a house with a crumbling foundation. The Sea Peoples, then, were likely the final, catastrophic earthquake. They may not have marched directly inland to besiege the capital themselves. Instead, their true weapon was strategic strangulation. By sweeping down the coastline, they destroyed the vital port cities like Ugarit, the essential links in the Hittite supply chain. They severed the empire's access to trade, to communication, and to the grain shipments from Egypt that had become a lifeline. The most chilling evidence of this comes from the last known Hittite diplomatic correspondence. A clay tablet found in the ruins of Ugarit contains a desperate plea from the Hittite king, appealing to the king of Ugarit for urgent food shipments. The reply from Ugarit is haunting. "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the Hatti land, and all my ships are in the land of Lucca?" It is a message of utter paralysis. The Hittite army was deployed elsewhere, perhaps to the north, and could not return. The supply ships were gone. The empire was cut off at the knees. With its coastal lifelines severed and its heartland starving, the Hittite state imploded. The central authority in Hattusa lost its ability to command, to feed its people, or to defend itself. In this vacuum of power, the final blow could have come from many directions, perhaps from the Sea Peoples themselves pushing inland, or more likely from internal rebellions and opportunistic raids by neighboring tribes surging into the power vacuum. The mighty capital, isolated and starving, would have been a brittle shell. Its burning was the funeral pyre of an entire system. The fall of the Hittites is the ultimate case study in the Sea Peoples method. They were the catalyst that turned a crisis into a cataclysm. They did not need to topple every wall themselves. They only needed to push the first domino in a long, fragile line. And when that last domino fell, one of history's greatest empires vanished into the dark, leaving behind only ashes and unanswered letters. While Hattusa's fall echoes with the silence of abandonment, the city of Ugarit speaks to us directly in its final, terrified whispers. This was not a remote capital, but a bustling cosmopolitan port on the coast of modern-day Syria, a critical hub in the Bronze Age trade network. Its archives, baked hard by the very fires that destroyed the city, were discovered in the 1930s. They contain the last messages ever sent from its palace, a real-time chronicle of collapse etched in clay. In one, the king of Ugarit writes frantically to the king of Elashia, the ancient name for Cyprus. The translation is chillingly immediate. "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country." The letter continues, pleading for help, but then reveals a devastating truth. It states that all of Ugarit's own troops and ships are stationed far away in the land of the Hittites. The city was left utterly defenseless, its military strength committed to a failing ally, while the true danger emerged from the sea it had always depended upon. This is more than a record, it is a snapshot of a mind reeling from shock. You can almost hear the panic in the scribe's stylus, the desperate formality of calling another king father in a last bid for aid. The phrase "they did evil things" is a stark, almost childlike summation of unimaginable horror, a trauma so complete it defies detailed description. Another tablet from the same archive is a reply, and it is just as haunting. The ruler of Alashia writes back, essentially telling Ugarit to face its fate alone. He speaks of his own cities being attacked, his own people being killed. What you hear in this exchange is the sound of the entire system breaking down. For centuries, these kings had operated on a code of diplomatic reciprocity, a "you scratch my back" understanding sealed with gifts and marriages. Now, in the hour of greatest need, that code shattered. Every kingdom was fighting for its own survival, the bonds of civilization severed by sheer necessity. Ugarit's letters freeze a moment in time, the precise instant when a vibrant, wealthy city realized it was completely alone. The enemy ships did not just bring fire and swords, they brought a profound and terrifying isolation. The attack was so swift that these final pleas for help were never even sent, found neatly shelved in the burning palace, a testament to a world that ended before the mail could go out. The silence that swallowed Ugarit also echoed across the Aegean Sea. While empires fell in the east, a brilliant civilization was meeting a similarly fiery end in the west. The Mycenaean Greeks, the builders of mighty citadels like Mycenae with its famous Lion Gate and the sprawling palace of Pylos, saw their world crumble. Their grand administrative centers, filled with records on clay tablets in a script we call Linear B, were violently destroyed. Archaeological layers reveal a consistent and terrifying signature: intense, widespread fire. These were not accidental blazes, these were deliberate conflagrations that reduced centers of power to ash and rubble. The palace economies, so complex and centralized, shattered completely. The art of writing vanished from Greece for centuries, so where do the sea peoples fit into this Aegean mystery? The Egyptian name Denyen sounds remarkably close to Danaoi, a term Homer used for the Greeks. This presents a haunting possibility. Were the Mycenaeans not just victims but also perpetrators? Could some of these Greek warriors, their own homes collapsing behind them, have joined the Great Migration, becoming the Denyen in Egyptian records? The idea transforms the narrative. It suggests the sea peoples were not a foreign plague, but a symptom of a systemic failure, a whirlpool of displaced populations where the line between victim and raider became tragically blurred. This blurring of identities might even be preserved in our oldest stories. Consider the legend of the Trojan War. For centuries, it was considered pure myth. Then, in the late 19th century, archaeologists uncovered a great city at Hisarlik in Turkey, a city that showed signs of siege and destruction around the very time of the late Bronze Age collapse. The epic tale, passed down orally for generations before being written by Homer, tells of a coalition of Greek kings sailing across the Aegean to attack a powerful city in Anatolia. Could this be a garbled, poetic memory of the chaos? The heroes of the story, like Achilles and Odysseus, are not unlike the sea peoples described in Egyptian reliefs, seafaring warriors seeking plunder and glory. And the aftermath of the Trojan War in myth is one of long, troubled voyages home, of kingdoms overturned and heroes lost, a perfect metaphor for a world unmoored. The sea peoples may not have been a single nation, but a concept born of terror, a name given to the frightening, faceless chaos that emerged when the old map was erased. In that chaos, a Mycenaean warrior fleeing a burning palace might find himself on a ship alongside a displaced Anatolian farmer, all sailing toward the last light on the horizon, Egypt. Their collective story, half remembered and reshaped by centuries of retelling, might just be the echo we call the Trojan War. The horned helmet warriors from the Egyptian carvings were not just pharaonic propaganda. We find their likeness cast in bronze over 1,000 miles to the west on the rugged island of Sardinia. This is where the story of the sea peoples takes a profound turn, moving from shadowy invaders to a recognizable human tragedy. Sardinia in the late Bronze Age was home to the Nuragic civilization, a remarkable culture named for its most iconic creation, the Nurag. These are not simple stone huts, but colossal, conical towers built from massive, unmortared blocks, often standing 2 or even 3 stories tall. Thousands of them still dot the Sardinian landscape, silent sentinels that speak of a complex, organized society capable of monumental architecture. Within the ruins of these towers and their surrounding villages, archaeologists have uncovered a treasure trove of small bronze figurines. Among them are detailed statuettes of warriors, and their gear is unmistakable. They wear horned helmets, carry round shields, and brandish long swords. The resemblance to the Sherden warriors depicted on the walls of Medinet Habu is not a vague similarity, it is a direct match. This is a material culture link, a physical object from one place mirroring an image from another, bridging the Mediterranean. The Sherden, then, were almost certainly a people connected to Sardinia, but here the narrative deepens. The Nuragic civilization was not destroyed in a sudden cataclysm around 1200 BCE. Instead, it shows signs of a gradual transformation, a slow decline possibly linked to overuse of local resources or internal social shifts. This presents a compelling and more nuanced theory. Perhaps the Sherden were not born as ruthless pirates, but as a population under pressure. As conditions on their island grew difficult, groups of these skilled warriors, with their distinct military technology, may have taken to the sea not for conquest but for survival. They would have entered the chaotic eastern Mediterranean as mercenaries, selling their services to the highest bidder, which is exactly how they first appear in Egyptian records decades before the Great Invasion, as elite guards in the pharaoh's own army. Only later, when the entire system collapsed, did they become part of the desperate coalition storming the Nile Delta. This Sardinian connection forces us to reimagine the Sea Peoples. They were not a mindless force of nature. They were likely a mixture of displaced communities, economic migrants, and armed bands, all set adrift by a chain of crises that stretched from the Aegean to the western Mediterranean. The horned helmet is not just a symbol of terror, it is a symbol of a lost home, worn by a people caught in a historical current they could not control. The Peleset, the most vividly remembered of these tribes, offer a remarkable story not of disappearance but of transformation. After their defeat by Pharaoh Ramesses III, they did not vanish into the sea. Instead, they settled permanently along the southern coast of Canaan, in a stretch of land that would one day bear their name, Philistia, which gives us the word Palestine. This was no temporary camp. They built new lives in cities like Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Ekron, and the ground beneath these cities holds the key to their true identity. When archaeologists dig through the layers of time, they hit a distinct stratum dating to just after 1200 BCE. In that layer, the entire character of daily life changes abruptly. The local Canaanite pottery, simple and utilitarian, is replaced by something entirely new and sophisticated. This is Philistine by chrome ware, pottery decorated with vibrant red and black geometric patterns with stylized birds and looping spirals. The technique and aesthetic are not native to Canaan. They are a direct import from the Aegean world, echoing the styles of Mycenaean Greece. It is as if an entire community brought their dishes with them, a tangible piece of their old home. But the clues go far beyond pottery. Their dietary habits tell a story of cultural stubbornness. While the local Canaanite populations largely avoided pork, the new settlers in Ashkelon and Ekron consumed it enthusiastically. Animal bone evidence shows a sharp increase in pig remains in their garbage pits. They also ate dog, a practice found in some Aegean sites but considered taboo by their Canaanite neighbors. Even their architecture shifted. They began building houses with central hearths, a common feature in Aegean homes but unusual for the region. This was not a raid, this was a migration. A whole people had arrived with their women, their children, their cooks, and their craftsmen. They clung to the customs of their lost homeland for generations, even as they slowly adapted to their new environment. Over time, the vibrant bichrome pottery grew simpler. The distinctive dietary habits gradually blended with local practices. The Philistines, the feared sea people, eventually faded into the population, their unique identity absorbed over centuries. Their story completes a profound arc from terrifying invaders of Egyptian legend to settled neighbors of the Israelites in the Bible, and finally into the very fabric of the land itself. They remind us that history's most destructive forces are often just people, desperately trying to find a place to call home again. The horned helmets and round shields of the Sherden, once a terrifying sight on the horizon, were now depicted as trophies in the sand. Pharaoh Ramesses III's temple at Medinet Habu proclaims a definitive end to the threat, a moment of salvation carved in stone for eternity. The centerpiece of this narrative is the Battle of the Delta, a desperate clash that would decide the fate of Egypt itself. The reliefs show a scene of controlled chaos. The Egyptian fleet, comprised of sleek, oared vessels, has trapped the invaders' ships in the confined waterways of the Nile Delta. Egyptian archers line the banks, raining arrows down onto the enemy decks in a deadly crossfire. The text boasts that the invaders were dragged ashore, hemmed in, and slaughtered on the beach. It was a masterful defensive strategy, turning the geography of the river mouths into a killing ground, preventing the sea peoples from using their greatest asset, their mobility. For a civilization that had watched the world burn around it, this was more than a battle, it was a divine deliverance. Ramesses presented himself as the lone bulwark against the chaos, the protector who stood firm when every other kingdom fell. Yet, if you look past the triumphant propaganda, a more complicated and sobering picture emerges. The very fact that such a desperate, all-or-nothing battle had to be fought at Egypt's literal doorstep reveals how close the kingdom came to total collapse. This was not a victory won on distant frontiers, this was a last stand at the heart of the nation, and while Egypt survived, it did so as a ghost of its former self. The cost was catastrophic. The treasury was emptied to fund the war effort and to build the massive fortifications that now line the coast. The empire in Canaan, which had supplied wealth and resources for centuries, was permanently lost, its cities either destroyed or now inhabited by the victorious Peleset, the Philistines. The intricate international trade networks were in ruins, cutting Egypt off from the sources of tin, copper, and luxury goods that fueled its economy and its prestige. The grand era of pyramid builders and conquering pharaohs was over. The centuries that followed were marked by internal strife, corruption, and a steep decline in royal authority. So we must ask, what kind of victory was this? From the Egyptian perspective, survival alone was a triumph. But from a wider historical view, the Battle of the Delta looks less like a defeat for the sea peoples and more like a strategic redirection. The coalition was a force of pressure like water, seeking the path of least resistance. When they met an immovable object in Ramesses' Egypt, they did not vanish, they simply flowed elsewhere. Some, like the Peleset, settled in the lands they had already ravaged. Others may have dispersed back into the Mediterranean, their cohesion broken but their people surviving. Egypt's victory exhausted it so completely that it could no longer project power or influence beyond its borders. The invaders may have failed to breach the final gate, but they succeeded in burning down the entire neighborhood. The world that emerged from the smoke was irrevocably theirs. The grand narratives of war and empire often ignore the most powerful player of all, the climate. Behind the carved reliefs of battles and the burned ruins of cities, a slower, more implacable force was tightening its grip on the ancient world. To understand why the sea peoples moved, we must look past their ships and swords and into the very rings of ancient trees and the mud at the bottom of the sea. Scientists now identify a period known as the 3.2 kiloyear event, a mouthful of a term for a planetary crisis. Around 1200 BCE, the global climate shuddered. From the Aegean to the Indus Valley, a prolonged and severe drought set in, lasting for decades, perhaps even centuries. The evidence is etched in nature's own archives. In the highlands of Anatolia, ancient juniper trees tell a story of relentless thirst. Their growth rings, studied by dendrochronologists, become desperately narrow for generations, indicating years of stunted growth from a lack of rain. Simultaneously, sediment cores drilled from the bed of the Mediterranean Sea reveal a parallel tale. Layers of dust and pollen show a dramatic shift, a landscape where hardy, drought-resistant plants were thriving, while the pollens of oak and other trees that need steady moisture simply vanish. This was not a single bad harvest, it was a fundamental rewiring of the environment. For the fragile, agriculture-dependent kingdoms of the Bronze Age, this was a death sentence. Imagine the slow, grinding horror. Year after year, the rains fail, the wheat and barley in the fields wither, the irrigation canals run dry, the palace granaries, those symbols of imperial power, are emptied, never to be refilled. Famine is not a sudden event, but a creeping shadow that darkens every home. It begins with rationing, then with hunger, then with the desperate search for anything to eat. In such conditions, the social contract frays and then snaps. Why should a farmer starve while a distant king's storehouse still has grain? Why remain loyal to a central authority that can no longer provide the most basic security, food? This environmental catastrophe created a vast pool of the desperate entire populations unmoored from their land and their loyalties. Starving villagers from the Hittite highlands, failed fishermen from the Aegean coasts, and pastoralists whose grasslands had turned to dust all began to move. They became climate refugees on a continental scale. Initially, these movements might have been small, local searches for sustenance. But as the drought persisted and the pressure built, these trickles of people converged into streams and then into a flood. They moved toward the last places where water and food might still be found, following river valleys and coastlines, inevitably clashing with other desperate groups and the settled kingdoms in their path. What began as a search for survival hardened through necessity and conflict into a way of life. The displaced farmer with nothing left to lose picks up a spear. The scattered bands competing for the same dwindling resources learn to organize for defense and then for offense. The climate did not create the sea people's culture or their distinctive ships, but it provided the fuel, the sheer human desperation that powered their terrifying migration. They were not born as a warrior horde, they were forged by hunger. The 3.2 kiloyear event reminds us that the most dramatic collapses in human history are rarely caused by a single villain or a lone battle. They are often the tragic finale of a much longer, quieter drama, written in tree rings and seabed mud where the real enemy was a changing sky. Homer's epic poems are more than just myth, they are a memory palace of a lost age. Within the rhythmic verses of the Iliad and the Odyssey, scholars have long heard echoes of the very world the sea peoples helped topple. The connection is not just thematic but startlingly specific. Consider the description of warfare. Homer's heroes do not fight in the rigid, regimented phalanxes of later classical Greece. Instead, they are champions who excel in individual combat, leaping from their ships to raid coastal settlements, much like the hit-and-run tactics depicted in Egyptian reliefs. Their weapons, too, align with this era. The heroes wield long, thrusting spears and large, body-covering shields, but they also prize the slashing sword, a weapon that came to prominence in the late Bronze Age and is iconic in sea people's imagery. Even the famed boar's tusk helmet worn by Odysseus in the Iliad finds its exact match in archaeological digs from Mycenaean Greece. This is not a vague backdrop, it is a detailed portrait of a specific time and way of war. The historical link grows even stronger when we cross-reference Homer with the archives of the Hittites. In their diplomatic correspondence, the Hittite kings frequently mention a troublesome western kingdom they call Archaeology. The name is a near-perfect linguistic match for Achaea, another Homeric name for the lands of the Greeks. These texts describe the Ohiyowa as a seafaring power, sometimes an ally, sometimes a rival, meddling in the affairs of Anatolia's western coast. They speak of a man named Atarasiya, the man of Ohiya, who led military raids with chariots and infantry. Could this be a historical echo of the Greek hero Atreus, the father of Agamemnon? The evidence suggests the Mycenaeans were not isolated in their Aegean palaces, but active, sometimes aggressive participants in Anatolian politics. Their involvement may have destabilized the region long before the final collapse. This brings us to the most haunting question of all. If the Trojan War reflects a real conflict between Mycenaean Greeks and a powerful Anatolian city, what happened to the victors? The Odyssey provides a possible answer. It is not merely a story of one man's journey home, it is a catalogue of chaos. Odysseus and his men encounter shattered societies, lawless coasts, and displaced peoples everywhere they sail. They themselves become a ruthless, predatory band, raiding the island of the Cicons just as the sea peoples might have done. His decade-long struggle to return to a homeland that has itself been thrown into disorder mirrors the experience of an entire generation unmoored by the collapse. Perhaps the Odyssey is the great epic of the sea peoples, not from the perspective of their victims, but from within the storm itself, a poetic memory of what it meant to be a warrior when the world you knew had vanished beneath the waves. But what if the name itself is a profound misunderstanding? The term sea peoples feels concrete, a label for a specific enemy. Yet modern archaeology is tearing that certainty apart, revealing a far more tangled and human story. The very idea of them as a unified people is now one of history's great open questions. Were they a single ethnic group with a shared homeland, a deliberate alliance of different tribes, or simply a catch-all phrase used by terrified Egyptians to describe any and all chaos arriving by ship? The evidence points overwhelmingly to the last option. Think of it like this. If a civilization 3,000 years from now unearthed records from Europe in the 5th century, they might find panicked writings about barbarian invasions. They might lump together the Vandals, the Goths, the Huns, and the Franks as a single, monstrous force called the Land Peoples. But we know these were distinct groups with different languages and origins, all set in motion by a cascade of pressures. The Sea Peoples label suffers from the same flaw. It is a victim's term born of fear and a lack of precise knowledge. An Egyptian scribe in the Nile Delta, seeing strange ships with plumed warriors, would not have cared about their precise tribal affiliations. They were simply the peoples of the sea, a terrifying and faceless other. This linguistic simplification, carved in stone for eternity, has shaped our perception ever since. Some scholars argue that what we call the sea peoples were primarily opportunistic pirates, freebooters who took advantage of the crumbling world order. They were not migrating nations, but armed bands profiting from the chaos, like vultures circling a wounded animal. Others see them as displaced economic migrants, whole communities of farmers and artisans forced from their homes by famine and earthquake, who turn to raiding only when no other option for survival remained. The most compelling modern theory moves beyond invaders and defenders entirely. It is called the systems collapse model. Imagine the late Bronze Age world not as a collection of independent kingdoms, but as a single, incredibly complex machine. This machine had many interdependent parts, specialized trade routes for tin and copper, a shared diplomatic language, elite gift exchanges between palaces, and a class of scribes and administrators to keep it all running. Then multiple stresses hit at once. The climate shifted, causing widespread drought and crop failure. A major earthquake or series of quakes damaged critical infrastructure. Internal rebellion strained social order. The machine began to shudder and smoke. The sea peoples were not the wrench thrown into the gears. They were the sparks flying out as the gears themselves ground together and shattered. They were a symptom of the total breakdown, not the primary cause. In this view, the collapse had no single villain. It was a perfect storm of environmental, economic, and social failures that overwhelmed the system's ability to cope. The coordinated, pan-Mediterranean nature of the collapse supports this. How could a single group of raiders simultaneously destroy empires in Greece, Anatolia, and the Levant while also fighting Egypt? It seems implausible, but if those empires were already critically weakened, then the arrival of even modest bands of desperate, armed migrants could have been the final push that sent them over the edge. This reframes the entire narrative. It is not a story of a mysterious civilization conquering the world. It is a tragic story of an interconnected world falling apart, where the lines between victim, refugee, and raider became hopelessly blurred. A Hittite farmer, his fields barren, might join a band heading south for food. A Mycenaean sailor, his port destroyed, might turn his ship to piracy. By the time they reached the Egyptian coast, they were no longer who they once were. They were simply survivors in a broken age, and history gave them a collective name born from the smoke of the cities they helped burn. The ground beneath these ancient cities holds the final, unspoken testimony. To walk through the ruins of Hattusa today is to feel a profound silence, broken only by the wind through the fallen stone. But for an archaeologist's trowel, that silence speaks volumes. The story is written in the soil itself, in a distinct band of dark, charcoal-rich earth that cuts across the entire site like a scar. This is the destruction layer. At Hattusa, it is meters thick, a staggering accumulation of ash, burned timber, and collapsed masonry. Mixed within this layer are the poignant, everyday artifacts of catastrophe: shattered pottery still lying where it fell, precious metals melted into bizarre shapes by the intense heat, and the chilling absence of any human remains buried with care. The city was not abandoned peacefully, it was consumed. This pattern repeats with eerie consistency at site after site. At Ugarit, the last diplomatic letters were found neatly filed in the burning palace, a bureaucracy interrupted mid-sentence by the final blaze. At Megiddo, a site so often destroyed it gave its name to Armageddon. A layer from this period reveals a city put to the torch, its once grand palaces reduced to foundations. The evidence is stark and physical: arrowheads lodged in defensive walls, stores of valuable goods left behind in a frantic flight, and in some grim instances, the skeletons of those who did not escape, left unburied where they fell. This is not the slow decay of time, it is the violent signature of conquest. Yet within this brutal clarity lies the core of the mystery. While we can see the devastating effects of the sea peoples with perfect clarity, we cannot find the people themselves. Archaeologists have scoured the Mediterranean for a definitive sea people's homeland, a village, a cemetery, a distinct set of ruins that screams this is where they came from. And they have found nothing. There is no sea people's pottery style that appears everywhere they raided, only the local styles shattered. There are no unique burial practices that trace a path back to a single origin point. The invaders are ghosts in the archaeological record, visible only in the destruction they left behind and in the new cultural layers that emerged in places like Ashkelon after they settled. This absence is deafening. It tells us that the sea peoples were not a traditional civilization moving its center of power. They were a phenomenon of movement itself, a wave of humanity that carried little with them except their weapons, their desperation, and their capacity for violence. They lived on their ships and in temporary camps, leaving almost no trace for us to find 3,000 years later. Their most enduring monuments are not their own temples, but the ashes of the cities they burned. Amidst the flames and the frantic letters, one kingdom's name appears again and again: Alashia. To the great empires of the Bronze Age, this was not a minor outpost, it was an economic powerhouse, the ancient name for the island of Cyprus. Its wealth was not in gold or silver, but in a metal far more vital to the age: copper. Cyprus sat atop some of the richest copper ore deposits in the entire Mediterranean. This reddish metal, when alloyed with tin from distant lands, became bronze, the very substance that gave the era its name. From its harbors, ships laden with ingots shaped like stretched ox hides sailed to every major port, feeding the insatiable demand for tools, weapons, and prestige objects. Alatia was the indispensable supplier, the keystone in the arch of Bronze Age industry. And when the collapse came, the archaeological record shows this keystone did not just fall, it was violently torn from its place. Across the island, from the grand coastal cities like Nkomi and Kishan to inland centers, archaeologists uncover that same, now familiar layer of ash and destruction dating to around 1200 BCE. Fortification walls were breached and burned. Workshops where copper was smelted were left in ruins, but here the story takes a critical twist. In the decades immediately following this wave of destruction, something new appears in the soil. A distinct style of pottery, handmade and decorated with bold, geometric patterns, begins to show up in settlements. This is not local Cypriot ware. Its closest parallels are found in the Aegean world and, tellingly, along the coast of Canaan in the new Philistine settlements. This is the pottery of the newcomers. It tells us that after the fires cooled, new people arrived on Cyprus and began to rebuild. They did not just raid and leave, they stayed. This dual evidence of catastrophic destruction followed by a clear cultural influx positions Cyprus at the very heart of the mystery. Its strategic location, a large island within sight of the coasts of Anatolia and the Levant, made it the perfect crossroads. Scholars now propose a compelling and chaotic scenario. Cyprus was not merely a target of the Sea Peoples, it likely became their crucible. Imagine the island in those turbulent decades. As drought and earthquake shattered communities across Anatolia and the Aegean, the first waves of displaced people would have naturally reached its shores, a large, fertile island just a short voyage away. Some may have come as refugees, others as raiders attacking the wealthy copper towns. In the ensuing chaos, the island's existing social order would have collapsed. Into this power vacuum poured more groups from different origins, all converging on this single strategic point. Here on Cyprus, these disparate bands of desperate people, the Sherden, the Denyen, the Jekka, and others, could have first encountered one another. They would have shared knowledge, combined forces, and organized. The island's resources, especially its ports and its remaining stocks of copper for weapons, would have provided the material means for larger campaigns. From this consolidated base, the coalition we call the Sea Peoples could have launched their coordinated assaults on the mainland, first north to the Hittite territories, then south down the Levantine coast toward Egypt. Cyprus, then, may have been the anvil upon which the scattered sparks of collapse were hammered into a single, devastating sword. Its story encapsulates the entire tragedy, a place that was both a victim of the initial storms of disruption and inevitably a launching point for the final cataclysmic wave. This connection to Sardinia raises a profound question about the Nuragic civilization. If the Sherden truly originated there, how did a people from an island in the western Mediterranean reach the shores of Egypt? The answer lies in their forgotten mastery of the sea. The Nuragic towers were not just fortresses, they were landmarks for a maritime culture. Recent archaeological discoveries have shattered the old view of Sardinia as an isolated backwater. On the island itself, miniature bronze models of ships have been found, showing sophisticated vessels with high prows and multiple oars built for open water journeys. More tellingly, fragments of distinctively styled Nuragic pottery have been unearthed hundreds of miles from home. Pieces have been identified on the island of Crete in southern Greece and most significantly on Cyprus. This is not the scattered debris of a single shipwreck. It is the footprint of established trade routes. These pots carried olive oil, wine, or grain, and their presence across the eastern Mediterranean tells us the Nuragic people were not strangers to long-distance voyaging. They were integrated into the same vast network that connected Egypt, the Hittites, and the Mycenaeans. They knew the sea lanes, the currents, and the ports. This changes everything about the Sherden. They were not primitive raiders appearing out of a void. They were seasoned seafarers from a complex society, intimately familiar with the wider world and its vulnerabilities. In the stable centuries of the Bronze Age, their skills would have been a valuable commodity. A neuralgic warrior raised in a culture of tower building and sea travel, possessing advanced metal weapons, would have been the perfect candidate for a mercenary. This is exactly how they first appear in the historical record. Decades before the Great Invasion, Egyptian texts mention the Sherden not as enemies, but as elite guards in the pharaoh's own army. They were the special forces of their day, hired for their unique fighting style and naval expertise. Imagine the scene in a royal court in Egypt or the Hittite Empire. A captain from Sardinia, with his horned helmet under his arm, negotiates a contract for himself and his crew. They pledge their swords to the highest bidder, protecting trade ships, putting down rebellions, or fighting in foreign wars. For a time, this system worked. The empires paid for security, and the mercenaries found wealth and purpose far from home. But then the system began to fail. As drought caused famine and earthquakes toppled cities, the empires that employed these warriors started to crumble. The regular payments of silver and grain would have dried up. The mercenary, now stranded in a foreign land without pay, faced a stark choice. He could starve alongside the civilization that no longer needed him, or he could use his formidable skills to take what he needed. The bands of Sherden, along with other displaced mercenaries and refugees, likely coalesced into something new. The hired protectors became the pirates. The guards at the gate became the force battering it down. They turned against the very empires that had once defined their livelihood, not out of innate hatred, but out of a desperate need to survive in a world where all the old rules were burning. Their journey from respected mercenaries to feared invaders is perhaps the most human story within the entire collapse, a tragic arc from order to chaos written not in stone, but in the choices of hungry men far from home. The sound of the loom is the sound of home. In the rebuilt city of Ashkelon, amidst the new pottery and the unfamiliar food, it was the rhythmic clack of the loom weight that maintained a cultural heartbeat. These were not the simple, donut-shaped weights used by their Canaanite neighbors. Philistine loom weights were pyramidal or spool-shaped, a distinct technology brought across the sea, designed for a specific style of vertical loom common in the Aegean. As women wove cloth in their new homes, the very tools in their hands whispered of a distant homeland, a tangible thread of memory in every piece of fabric. Yet their daily life was not a museum of the past, it was a vibrant, adaptive fusion. Archaeologists sifting through the Philistine layers in Ashkelon have uncovered a society building a new normal. They found the earliest known evidence of leavened bread in the region, a small, charred piece of dough preserved by fire, suggesting a baking tradition that prized lightness and flavor over simple flatbreads. They introduced the sycamore tree to the area, not a native species, likely for its shade and its fruit, another living import to shape their environment to familiar comforts. This was a people putting down roots, literally and figuratively. Their religious world, glimpsed through small clay figurines and architectural remains, hints at a complex spiritual life. They may have worshipped a version of Potnia, the mistress or mother goddess figure prevalent in Mycenaean religion, often depicted with upraised arms or holding animals. Over time, these Aegean deities would blend with local Canaanite gods, creating a unique Philistine pantheon that reflected their dual identity. This is the profound truth that archaeology reveals. The Philistines were not the brutish, uncultured giants of later biblical caricature. They were farmers, weavers, bakers, and parents. They missed the foods of their childhood and planted trees to remember them by. They prayed to the gods of their ancestors while learning the language of their new land. Their story in Ashkelon is not one of perpetual war, but of resilient creation, a testament to the human capacity to rebuild a world from the ashes of the old, carrying forward not just weapons but seeds, recipes, and the comforting weight of a familiar loom. Their names are ghosts in the record, but sometimes a ghost leaves a footprint. The clearest evidence of the Sea Peoples is not what they built, but what they named. Across the shattered map of the Bronze Age collapse, a handful of place names echo with a strange and persistent music, a linguistic trail that may lead us back to their lost homelands. Take the city of Sardis, the ancient capital of the Kingdom of Lydia in western Anatolia. Its name sounds undeniably close to Sardinia and to the Sherden warriors of the Egyptian inscriptions. Could Sardis have been a settlement or a stronghold established by Sherden people as they moved through the region? It is a compelling echo across geography and time. Even more telling are the personal names we find among the Philistines centuries later. The most famous Philistine of all, the giant Goliath whom David faced, bears a name that is not Semitic, not Canaanite or Hebrew. Linguists have noted that Goliath shares a root with various Anatolian names, like the Lydian king Aliats. It is a name that feels at home in the languages of Western Anatolia and the Aegean, not the Levant. Other Philistine rulers mentioned in the Bible, names like Achish and Phicol, also defy local linguistic patterns, whispering of a different origin. These are not random sounds, they are cultural baggage carried across the sea and preserved for generations like heirlooms. The very language the early Philistines spoke seems to have left its mark. When they settled in Canaan, they adopted a local Semitic script for writing, but scholars examining the few early Philistine inscriptions that survive have spotted something unusual. They contain loanwords, terms that are not Semitic. One proposed example is the word for captain, Seren, used in the Bible to describe Philistine lords. This word has no Hebrew root, but it finds a possible cousin in the Greek word tyrannos, meaning lord or ruler. It is a faint but tantalizing linguistic fingerprint. These scattered clues, a city name here, a personal name there, a stray word embedded in a text, are all we have of their voices. No epic poem, no royal decree, no shopping list written by a Sea Peoples scribe has ever been found. Theirs was an oral culture in a time of collapse, their stories lost to the wind that filled their sails. So we are left with echoes, the name Sardis murmuring of Sardinia, Goliath echoing in Anatolia, a title that resonates with Greek. Each one is a fragment of a shattered mirror, reflecting not a single image but a scattered one. They point not to one origin but to many, confirming the modern view that the Sea Peoples were a coalition of disparate groups from across the Mediterranean. Their linguistic legacy is a puzzle where the pieces come from different boxes, all thrown together in the cataclysm, leaving us to wonder what whole stories those syllables once told. Theories of their origin are not just academic debates, they are attempts to map a ghost. For over a century, scholars have proposed competing visions of the Sea Peoples' homeland, each pointing to a different corner of the Mediterranean as ground zero for the cataclysm. The first major theory points north to the Balkans and the Danube region. Proponents of this northern invasion model suggest a great migration of tribes pushed south by climate change or population pressure, moving through Anatolia and picking up allies along the way before bursting onto the coastal plain. They point to certain pottery styles and weapon types found in later Balkan cultures that bear a vague resemblance to those seen in Egyptian reliefs. Yet this theory struggles with geography and motive. Why would a land-based migration from the north focus so intently on seaborne raids? The evidence feels circumstantial, a possible trickle rather than the flood described in the records. A second, more compelling theory looks west to the islands of the central Mediterranean. This is the Western origin hypothesis, strongly supported by those Sardinian bronze figurines with their horned helmets. It argues that groups from Sardinia, Sicily, and the Italian peninsula, perhaps under environmental stress, sailed east in search of new lands. The linguistic echoes are powerful here, with names like Shekelesh sounding like Sicily and Sherden like Sardinia. This theory neatly explains the appearance of these groups as both mercenaries and later invaders, familiar with the sea lanes yet foreign to the eastern kingdoms. But could Western groups alone have toppled empires? Their numbers and organization remain a point of doubt. Then there is the Eastern theory, which sees the Sea Peoples not as outsiders but as displaced insiders. This view places their origins squarely in the collapsing world of Anatolia and the Levant. Here, the argument is that they were not a mysterious foreign horde, but a coalition of uprooted peoples from regions already known to the Egyptians and Hittites, like the Lucca lands of southwestern Anatolia, long noted for their piracy. When their own societies fractured, these coastal populations simply turned their seafaring skills from trade to full-scale predation. This theory has the advantage of simplicity. They were always there, and when the system broke, they became its scavengers. Yet it fails to fully account for the dramatic cultural shift seen in places like Philistia, which point to a more distant Aegean origin. That brings us to the fourth and perhaps most resonant theory, the Aegean hypothesis. This argues that the core of the Sea Peoples were refugees from the collapsing Mycenaean Greek world and other Aegean islands. The evidence is strong in the material culture of the Philistines, their pottery, their hearths, their dietary habits. The names Denyen and Peleset fit comfortably within the linguistic sphere of the Aegean. This theory paints a tragic picture of once proud palace societies whose warriors, with nowhere left to go, took to their ships not as conquerors but as desperate survivors, carrying the last fragments of their culture with them. It transforms the invasion from a barbarian assault into a poignant diaspora of the defeated. So which map is correct? The compelling answer emerging from modern scholarship is that all of them hold a piece of the truth. The Sea Peoples were not a single people from a single place. They were the Mediterranean melting pot boiled over. Imagine the drought-stricken farmer from Anatolia, the unemployed mercenary from Sardinia, the displaced sailor from a burned Mycenaean port, and the rebel from a Canaanite city all meeting on a beach in Cyprus. Shared desperation became a common language. They were a perfect storm of migrations, a convergence of multiple streams of human crisis from every direction. The Egyptians, seeing this terrifying coalition arrive by ship, did what any overwhelmed civilization would do. They gave the monstrous, multifaceted chaos a single, simple name. The truth was far more complex and far more human than the carvings at Medinet Habu could ever show. That linguistic ghost haunting the ancient world has found a new voice in our own. The mystery of the Sea Peoples, a blank space in the historical record, has become a canvas for modern imagination. They appear not in scholarly journals, but in the digital battlefields of video games like Total War, where players can command their fleets and rewrite history. They stalk the pages of historical fiction novels, giving authors a chance to flesh out names like Denyen and Sherden with personalities and motives. Documentaries frame their story with ominous music and sweeping drone shots, presenting them as the ultimate ancient apocalypse. This enduring fascination is not accidental. They represent something fundamental in our psyche, the ultimate unknown. In a world where we have mapped every continent and decoded ancient genomes, the Sea Peoples remain a true enigma, a hole in our understanding that we cannot help but try to fill. They are the perfect historical vessel for our own anxieties. Think of the countless stories we tell about mysterious invaders from beyond the borders, whether in science fiction or dystopian tales. The Sea Peoples are the original template for this fear, a force that arrives without warning, speaks an unintelligible tongue, and exists only to dismantle the world as we know it. Their story resonates because it is a story of fragility. It taps directly into our deep-seated fear of societal collapse, the notion that our complex, interconnected civilization, for all its technology and might, could be undone by a chain of events we fail to foresee. They remind us that history is not a steady march of progress, but a story punctuated by sudden, catastrophic reversals. When we play a game commanding their armies or read a novel from their perspective, we are not just exploring the past, we are safely probing our own vulnerability. We are asking, through the veil of ancient history, what would we do when the lights go out? and in that question, the ghost of the sea people sails on, forever just beyond the horizon of our understanding. The ground has given us ashes and echoes, but the central mysteries remain stubbornly alive. For all our digging and deciphering, the sea peoples defy a simple explanation, leaving historians with a handful of profound and unanswered questions. The first is the most obvious and the most elusive. Where exactly did they come from? We have clues from Sardinian bronzes to Aegean pottery in Philistia, but these point in multiple directions at once. Was there a single lost homeland from which this entire movement sprang, or were they always a scattered coalition converging like rivers into a flood? Without a written record from their own hand, we are left trying to map a shadow. Closely tied to this is the question of their ultimate fate. We know the Peleset became the Philistines, but what of the others? After their defeat by Egypt, did the Sherden simply sail back to the western Mediterranean? Did the Denyen vanish into the hills of Anatolia or find new islands to call home? Their disappearance from the historical record is as abrupt as their arrival. They seem to dissolve into the populations they once terrorized, leaving behind only their cultural fingerprints in places like Cyprus and a lingering sense of a storm that passed. This leads directly to the great archaeological frustration, the lack of a definitive smoking gun. We have the destruction layers, we have the Egyptian carvings, and we have the settlements of survivors. But where is the purely sea people site? Where is the village, the cemetery, the sacred space that is undeniably theirs, untouched by the cultures they came from or the ones they settled among? This absence is itself a powerful clue. It suggests they were a people defined by movement, not place, living on their ships and in temporary camps, leaving almost no trace beyond the ruins of others. All of this circles back to the most fundamental puzzle of all. Did the sea peoples even have a shared identity, or was the name itself an Egyptian invention, a convenient label for any and all chaos arriving by sea? Were they a conscious alliance with common goals, or simply a collection of desperate refugees and opportunistic pirates who found themselves traveling the same destructive path? The Egyptian term peoples of the sea feels concrete, but it may be the ultimate historical simplification, a victim's attempt to name a faceless terror. What makes this ancient cold case so compelling for researchers today is that each potential answer only generates more questions. If they were climate refugees, what specific event triggered the final, coordinated push? If they were a warrior culture, why is their material signature so faint? Every new discovery, like a piece of neuralgic pottery in Cyprus or a genetic study of Philistine remains, adds a new piece to the puzzle, but the full picture remains tantalizingly out of focus. This is not dead history, it is a living mystery. The silence they left behind is not empty, it is filled with the restless curiosity of every person who looks at a map of the ancient world and wonders, who were the ghosts in the ships and what were they truly seeking? The silence left by the sea peoples was not an end but a beginning. In the smoldering ruins of the old empires, something new and vital began to stir. The great centralized palaces were gone, their rigid control shattered. The vacuum they left behind was filled by smaller, more agile societies, peoples who had survived on the margins of the Bronze Age world and were now poised to inherit it. From the ashes of Ugarit and other coastal cities rose the Phoenicians. They were not a new people, but their moment had arrived. With the Hittite and Egyptian overseers gone, these master sailors and traders seized their chance. They took to the sea not as raiders but as merchants, establishing a far-flung network of colonies from Cyprus to Carthage, and pioneering an alphabet so simple and efficient it would become the ancestor of our own. Their success was born directly from the collapse of the old, monopolistic trade routes. Similarly, in the highlands of Canaan, away from the devastated coasts, the loose confederation of tribes known as the Israelites began to coalesce into a kingdom. Their stories, later written down, are filled with the trauma of displacement and conflict with new neighbors like the Philistines, a direct narrative thread back to the chaos of the invasion. Further inland, the Arameans, another group of semi-nomadic peoples, moved into the fractured spaces of Syria, eventually making their language Aramaic, the common tongue of the Near East for centuries. This was the profound, unintended legacy of the cataclysm. The monolithic superpowers were gone, and in their place emerged a patchwork of competitive, innovative states. This decentralized, volatile environment was a crucible for new ideas in politics, warfare, and culture. It forced societies to adapt, to experiment, and to find new ways to organize and survive. The old Bronze Age system, for all its glory, had grown stagnant and brittle. The storm of the Sea Peoples, in its horrific violence, broke that shell. It cleared the ideological and political ground, making room for the world that would follow. Centuries later, on the rocky peninsula of Greece, villages would slowly grow into the city-states of Athens and Sparta. The memory of the Mycenaean past became myth, a distant, half-remembered age of heroes. The Greeks of the classical era built their philosophy, their democracy, and their art not on the foundations of a palace bureaucracy, but on the fragments left after the fall. Even further west, the early seeds of Rome were planted in this new Iron Age landscape, a world where mobility and innovation were paramount. So we are left with a staggering historical paradox. The Sea Peoples, remembered only as agents of oblivion, became the unlikely midwives of the future. They did not intend to create a new world. They were simply trying to survive the collapse of their own. But in sweeping away the old order, they inadvertently set the stage for everything that came after. The very civilizations we look to as the bedrock of Western history, from the Hebrew prophets to the Greek philosophers, emerged in the long shadow of their passing. Their legacy, therefore, is not just one of destruction, but of terrifying, transformative renewal. The darkest age gave birth to the light we recognize. So the story ends not with a grand revelation, but with a profound echo. We have followed their ghostly trail from the terrified carvings at Medinet Habu to the ash-filled streets of Hattusa and Ugarit. We have seen their faces in Sardinian bronze and their dinner tables in Philistine pottery shards. Yet for every clue, a deeper question emerges. The true power of the Sea Peoples lies not in what we know about them, but in what they represent for us. They are a historical mirror. In their chaotic migration, we see our own era's anxieties about climate, refugees, and societal fragility. In their terrifying anonymity, we confront the fear of the unknown other. And in the sheer scale of the collapse they catalyzed, we recognize the haunting possibility that no civilization, no matter how glittering, is permanent. Their mystery endures because it is not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be continually reinterpreted. This is where the history becomes yours. The search is far from over. You can explore high-resolution images of those Egyptian reliefs from museums halfway across the world with a few clicks. You can read the translations of the last desperate letters from Ugarit. You can dive into the latest archaeological reports from Cyprus or Ashkelon. And most importantly, you can join the conversation. What theory makes the most sense to you? Are they displaced climate refugees, opportunistic pirates, or the tragic symptom of a broken system? Share your thoughts and questions below. The lost history of the Sea Peoples is not locked away in a dusty tomb. It is a living dialogue, a collective detective story spanning 3,000 years. The clues are all around us, waiting in the soil, in the ancient texts, and in our endless fascination with the shadows that once sailed from beyond the horizon. Your curiosity is the next chapter.